Colorado, 1885. There is an arithmetic to loss and an arithmetic to life, and for a long time Elias Thorne had believed they were the same equation. He was a man who understood numbers. He knew the count of his cattle, the acres of his land, the dollars and cents required to see a year through from thaw to first snow. He knew that he was 51 years old and that his wife, Martha, had been gone for 8 of them. He knew his son, Thomas, had been gone for the same 8 years, taken by the same fever that had stolen the light from his home. 8 years. The number was a stone in his pocket, smooth and heavy from constant turning. His ranch sat in a wide, lonely valley, carved by a patient river. The mountains stood guard in the distance, their peaks scraped clean by the wind. It was a beautiful place, a place of stark and honest truths. The land gave, but it also took. It demanded work and offered solitude in return. For Elias, the solitude had long ago curdled from peace into a simple, hollow fact. The house was too large. Martha had designed it, her drawings full of hope for a future spilling over with children and grandchildren. Now the empty rooms echoed with a silence that was louder than any sound. Elias lived in the kitchen and his bedroom. The rest of the house belonged to dust and memory. His dog, a gray-muzzled shepherd mix named Gus, was his only constant companion, a silent witness to a life pared down to its essential motions. His routine was the fence that kept chaos at bay, coffee before dawn, the bitter heat a familiar shock, chores in the cold air, the rhythm of work a prayer of sorts, mending tack, splitting wood, checking the herd. Each day was a copy of the one before, a bulwark against the kind of thinking that could pull a man under. He had stopped expecting things. Hope was a currency he no longer traded in. He had what he had, and he would keep it until his own time was done. It was simple arithmetic. He did not fight the loneliness. He did not court it. He simply lived alongside it, the way a man lives with a permanent limp. It was a part of him now, a feature of his own internal landscape, as fixed and certain as the mountains on the horizon. And so, he did not understand the figure he saw one Tuesday morning in late spring. It was just past dawn, the light still thin and gray, and a person was walking up the long, rutted track that led from the county road to his house. No one came to his ranch unannounced. The road was a commitment. He stood on his porch, a half-empty coffee cup in his hand, Gus standing beside him with a low, questioning rumble in his chest. The figure was small and moved with a steady, unhurried pace. Not a man, he realized as it drew closer. A woman. She wore a plain, travel-worn dress and carried a small, pathetic-looking bundle. She did not look lost. She looked like she knew exactly where she was going, even if Elias had no idea why here was her destination. He stayed where he was, watching. He was not a man who went looking for trouble, but he was also not a man who would turn his back on it if it landed on his doorstep. He readied himself, his face settling into the neutral, unreadable expression he wore into town. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, not breathing hard despite the long walk. She was young, younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25. Her face was plain but composed, her eyes a clear, steady gray that seemed to take in everything without judgment. They looked at him directly without fear or supplication. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked. Her voice was low and even. He nodded once, his eyes narrowed slightly. "I am. My name is Sarah Jenkins. The man at the livery in town said you owned this spread. He said you were a fair man." Elias said nothing. Fairness was a matter of opinion. "I'm looking for work," she said, getting straight to the point. "My wagon had to be left 2 days back. The family I was traveling with went on to Oregon. I decided my road ended here." He took in her worn boots, the dust ground into the hem of her dress. She looked tired, but not defeated. There was a strength in her stillness that he recognized. It was the strength of people who had seen the bottom and had simply decided to start climbing again. "I don't need a hand," he said. It was the truth. His life was a closed loop. There were no openings. "I can cook, clean, mend," she went on as if he hadn't spoken. "I can help with livestock if need be. I grew up on a farm. I'm not afraid of work." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Thorne. Just a chance. Room and board, and a small wage if you think I've earned it." He should have said no. It was the sensible thing to do. His life was his. It was quiet and ordered and sad, but it was his. A stranger, a young woman no less, was a complication he did not need. He saw Gus take a step forward, tail giving a single, tentative wag. The dog was a poor judge of character, too trusting by half. Elias looked away from her, toward the mountains. The silence stretched. He could feel her waiting, not anxiously, but with a kind of solid patience. He thought of the dusty rooms upstairs. He thought of the cold suppers he ate standing over the sink. He thought of the unending quiet. "The house is large," he said, the words surprising him. It was an admission of something. A flicker of understanding passed over her face. "I'm quiet," she said. He let out a slow breath. He was acting against his own better judgment, against the habits of 8 long years. But the liveryman had been right about one thing. He was, at his core, a fair man, and it did not seem fair to send her walking back down that long road with nothing. "1 month," he said, his voice gruff. "We'll see how it goes. There's a room at the back of the stairs. It's small, but it's clean." She did not offer a wide, grateful smile. She simply nodded once, a deep and serious acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." "Elias," he corrected, and he wasn't sure why. "Sarah," she replied. And with that, the closed loop of his life was broken. A new number had been added to the equation, and he did not yet know how to solve for it. The first week passed in a state of quiet observation. Elias went about his chores as he always had, but he was aware of her presence in a way that was both unsettling and, to his surprise, not entirely unpleasant. She was, as she had promised, quiet. She moved through the house with a soft-footed efficiency, and the house began to change. The first thing he noticed was the food. That first night, he came in from the barn, tired and ready for his usual meal of cold beef and bread. Instead, the smell of roasting chicken and potatoes met him at the door. It was a smell he hadn't encountered in that house for nearly a decade. He stopped in the doorway, momentarily disoriented. Sarah was at the stove, her back to him. She didn't turn. "Supper's ready," she said simply. "I hope you're hungry." He sat at the big oak table, the table he and Martha had bought at an auction, the table where he hadn't eaten a proper meal since she died. He ate in silence, and he ate more than he had in years. The food was simple, but it was good. It tasted of care. He said nothing when he was finished, just gave a short nod, and retreated to the porch with Gus. But he felt the meal settling inside him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the food itself. The next morning, when he came into the kitchen before dawn, there were 2 cups on the counter, and the coffee was already brewing. She had woken before him. She hadn't needed to. He didn't have to tell her he drank coffee first thing. She had simply observed and acted. He poured himself a cup, and then, after a moment's hesitation, he poured the second and carried it out to the small room at the back of the stairs. He left it on the floor outside her door, knocked once, and walked away. It felt like a conversation. Days later, he saw her sitting on the porch steps in the afternoon sun, a pile of his work shirts in a basket beside her. She was mending a tear in the elbow of one. He stopped, watching from a distance. Her stitches were small and neat, a perfect economical line that drew the worn fabric together. Martha had mended his shirts just so. The memory came to him, not with its usual sharp-edged pain, but with a dull, wistful ache. It was not a betrayal. It was simply a fact. A shirt was torn, and now it was being mended. Life had a way of demanding these small repairs. She looked up and saw him watching. She didn't flush or look away. "The fabric is thin here," she said, her voice practical. "It will hold for a while longer." "It didn't have to be done," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I know," she said. That "I know" echoed in his mind. It meant, "I understand. This is not in my job description." It meant, "I understand you are a man who is not used to being cared for." It meant, "I did it anyway." His respect for her grew. It was a quiet, grudging thing built on evidence. She saw what needed doing and did it, without fuss or need for praise. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the moods of the animals. He had a bay mare, Juniper, who had turned skittish and mean after losing a foal the previous year. Elias had mostly given up on her, leaving her to pasture. One afternoon, he saw Sarah by the paddock fence. She wasn't trying to corner the mare or force a bridle on her. She was just standing there, talking to the animal in a low, crooning voice. She had a handful of fresh clover. Juniper kept her distance, ears twitching, watching with wary eyes. Sarah didn't move closer. She just kept talking, her voice a calm, steady murmur against the vast silence of the valley. Elias watched from the barn doorway for a long time. It was an act of profound patience, something he hadn't had the heart for in a long while. The next day, he saw the mare take a piece of clover from Sarah's outstretched hand. He felt something shift inside him, a small loosening of a knot he hadn't realized was so tight. After 2 weeks, they needed supplies. The trip to town was a silent one, the wagon wheels crunching on the gravel road. Elias was intensely aware of her sitting beside him on the bench seat, her hands folded in her lap. It was the first time they had left the bubble of the ranch together, and he felt exposed. The town of Harmony was little more than a wide spot in the road with a general store, a livery, a church, and a saloon. Mr. Miller's general store was the town's nerve center. Miller, a bald man with spectacles perched on his nose, saw them pull up. By the time they walked in, he was already polishing the counter, a sure sign he was ready for a conversation. "Elias," he said, his eyes flicking from Elias to Sarah and back again. "Good to see you. Been a while." "Miller," Elias grunted, handing him a list. Miller's eyes lingered on Sarah. "And who is this? Finally decided you couldn't run that whole place by yourself?" "This is Sarah Jenkins," Elias said, his tone daring Miller to make something of it. "She's helping out at the house." "A pleasure, Miss Jenkins," Miller said, his smile a bit too wide. "It's good to see some life in that old house again. Elias here, he works too hard." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Doesn't know when to quit." Sarah simply nodded. "Mr. Thorne is a diligent man." Her calm, formal reply seemed to deflate Miller slightly. He gathered their supplies: flour, salt, coffee, tins of peaches. As he was totaling the bill, a man walked in. Daniel Finch. Finch owned the small bank in town and was considered the town's most eligible bachelor. He was handsome in a smooth, polished way, and he knew it. His eyes landed on Sarah immediately, his appraisal quick and confident. He tipped his hat. "Miss," he said, his voice slick as patent leather, "I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Daniel Finch." "Sarah Jenkins," she replied, her tone polite but cool. "Jenkins." Finch mused. "You're new to Harmony. Working for Elias, are you?" He gestured vaguely toward Elias. "That's a hard life out there. A lady with your qualities could find a much more comfortable position here in town. I might even know of one." The offer hung in the air, greasy and obvious. Elias felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. He didn't like Finch. He didn't like the way he looked at Sarah, as if she were an item on a shelf to be acquired. Sarah looked directly at Daniel Finch. Her gray eyes were unblinking. "I'm not looking for a comfortable position, Mr. Finch. I'm looking for an honest one. I've found it." She turned back to the counter. "Is that everything, Mr. Miller?" The dismissal was so clean, so absolute, that Finch was left speechless for a moment. He flushed, tipped his hat again with a stiff jerk, and left the store. Miller pushed his spectacles up his nose, a slow grin spreading across his face. He looked at Elias. "That's good help, all right," he said, and this time there was no gossip in it, only respect. On the ride home, the silence was different. It was filled with the ghost of that conversation. Elias felt the strange sense of pride, of satisfaction. She hadn't needed him to defend her. She was more than capable of handling the likes of Daniel Finch on her own. She had chosen the hard, honest life on his ranch over the easy, comfortable one Finch offered. The thought settled in his chest, warm and solid. What country are you listening from today? Drop it in the comments. It means everything to know where this voice is reaching. Now let's get back, because Elias Thorne is about to figure something out. The fence at the far edge of the north pasture needed mending. It was a full day's work, replacing posts rotted by winter snow and spring melt. He had planned to do it alone, as he did every year. "I'll come," Sarah said at breakfast, not as a question, but as a statement. He started to object. It was hard, dirty work, but he looked at her steady gaze and just nodded. They worked all morning under the wide, empty sky. The sounds were the thud of the post driver, the creak of leather, the snort of the horses. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together without the need for much speech. He would set the post, and she would hold it steady while he drove it into the earth. Her hands, he noticed, were strong and capable, not roughened but not delicate either. Around midday, they stopped to rest, sitting on a flat rock in the shade of a lone pine. The fence line marked the edge of his property. Beyond it, the land rolled on for miles, untamed. It was a liminal space, a boundary between what was his and what was not. He passed her the water canteen. "You didn't have to come," he said. It was becoming a familiar refrain. "I know," she said, her own familiar response. She took a drink, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "My father used to say that a fence line is an argument with the wilderness. You have to keep making your case year after year." It was the most she had ever volunteered about her past. "He was a farmer?" Elias asked, his voice quiet. "In Ohio," she confirmed, her eyes on the distant mountains. "We had 100 acres, good black soil, but the banks had their own arithmetic. My parents, they were good people. They worked hard, but the numbers didn't add up in their favor." She fell silent for a moment. "They're both gone now. The farm, too." She said it without a trace of self-pity. It was a simple, brutal fact, like a rotted fence post. He understood that kind of language. He found himself speaking before he had thought it through. "Martha, my wife, she loved this view." The name felt strange on his tongue, rusty from disuse. She said it was like looking at the first day of creation, before people came and made things complicated. He hadn't meant to say her name. He never spoke of her. But Sarah didn't offer condolences or awkward platitudes. She just sat with the name, letting it occupy the space between them. "It's a good place," she said softly, looking not at the view but at the ranch house small in the distance. "This valley, it feels settled, like it's been waiting a long time." He followed her gaze. He saw his home. For the first time in 8 years, he didn't just see a repository of ghosts and loss. He saw a house, a solid structure of wood and stone under the sun. He saw the smoke curling from the chimney from the fire she'd banked that morning. "It's been a long time since this place felt like a home," he heard himself say. The confession hung in the air, raw and exposed. She turned her head and looked at him. Her gray eyes held his, and in them he saw not pity, but a profound and simple understanding, a recognition. "I know," she whispered, and that "I know" was different from all the others. It was not about a mended shirt or a cup of coffee. It was about the vast, silent continent of his grief. It meant, "I see the emptiness you live in." It meant, "I understand the quiet you've wrapped around yourself like a shroud." It meant, "I am not afraid of it." In that moment, by a broken fence at the edge of his world, something fundamental shifted. An old, rusted lock deep inside him had been turned. A door he thought was sealed forever had been pushed open, just a crack, letting in a sliver of terrifying, brilliant light. That night, sleep would not come. Elias lay in his bed, staring into the darkness, the silence of the house pressing in on him. But it was a different silence now. It was the silence of another person breathing just down the hall. It was a silence full of possibility, and it terrified him. The conversation at the fence line played over and over in his mind. Her quiet "I know" echoed, not as a sound, but as a feeling. It had undone him. It had dismantled the careful structure of his solitude. And so the arithmetic began. He was 51 years old, a man already on the downhill slope of his life. His best years were behind him, buried in the churchyard with Martha and Thomas. Sarah was 25, maybe 26. She was at the very beginning of her life. The world was still open to her. She was a spring thaw. He was late autumn with winter closing in. The numbers were stark and unforgiving. 51 and 25. The gap was a chasm. It was not sensible. It was not practical. What would people say? He could hear Miller's voice, not respectful this time, but pitying. "Old fool," they would whisper behind their hands in town, "robbing the cradle." He imagined Daniel Finch's smug, knowing smile. The thought made his stomach clench. He was a man defined by his past, by his losses. She was a woman defined by her resilience, by her future. What right did he have to tether her future to his past, to anchor her bright, hopeful ship to his own sinking stone? It would be a selfish act, a cruel one. He got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the moon-washed landscape. Gus got up from his rug and came to stand beside him, resting his heavy head against Elias's leg. He absently stroked the dog's fur. He thought of Martha. A wave of guilt washed over him, so sharp it made him catch his breath. This was their home. This was their life he was living without her. Had he grieved long enough? Was there a set number of years for mourning? 8 years felt like a lifetime, and it felt like yesterday. To invite someone else into this space, into her space, it felt like a betrayal, a desecration of a holy place. He was too old. The house was too full of ghosts. The risk was too great. To open himself up to this feeling, this flicker of warmth in the cold ashes of his heart, was to open himself up to the possibility of losing again. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he would not survive it a second time. The arithmetic was simple. The risk was infinite, the reward uncertain. The sensible thing to do was to close the door that had been cracked open, to thank her for her work, pay her a handsome wage, and send her on her way before this feeling, whatever it was, could take root. He would tell her in the morning. He sat in his worn leather chair by the cold hearth, Gus at his feet, and waited for the sun to rise on the decision he had made. But as the first pale light began to outline the mountains, A different kind of calculation began, a counter-argument. He did not think of her age. He thought of her hands competently mending his shirt. He did not think of the gossip in town. He thought of her voice, low and calm, gentling the skittish mare. He did not think of Daniel Finch. He thought of her clear, direct gaze as she told him, "I'm not looking for a comfortable position. I'm looking for an honest one." He thought of the two coffee cups in the morning. He thought of the taste of a warm meal eaten at a table instead of over a sink. He thought of the sound of her quiet movements in the house, a sound that had begun to push back the oppressive silence. These things had no numbers. How could you measure the value of a person's character? What was the arithmetic for kindness? What was the going rate for a sense of peace you thought you'd never feel again? This was not an equation of age or practicality. This was an equation of worth. And her worth, her value, was immense. He saw it. He knew it in his bones. She was not a complication. She was a remedy. She was not a risk. She was a reason. He looked at his life, at the 8 years of just getting by, of living in a memorial to what he had lost. He had called it honoring them. But was it? Or was it just a long, slow surrender? Martha had been a woman full of life and laughter. She would have hated this silent, gray existence. She would have hated the dust in the upstairs rooms and the cold suppers. She would have wanted the house to be filled with life. He had been counting the wrong things. He had been so focused on the arithmetic of loss that he had forgotten how to calculate the value of what was right in front of him. Being sensible was just another word for being afraid. And he was tired of being afraid. Gus sighed in his sleep, a puff of warm air against his leg. The sun was clearing the peaks now, flooding the valley with golden light. A new day. Elias stood up. The decision he'd made in the dark of night dissolved in the morning light. A new decision took its place, solid and certain. He knew what he had to do, and he would not let the fool's arithmetic of fear stop him. He found her on the front porch. She was watching the sunrise, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. She had a mug of coffee in her hands. There was another one sitting on the railing waiting for him. He stood beside her, picking up the cup she had left for him. The warmth spread through his fingers. For a few long moments, they stood in silence, watching the day be born. It was a comfortable silence now, not an empty one. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it all before you answer." She turned her head slightly, her gaze on his profile. She waited. "I'm an old man," he said, the words simple and plain. "My life is more behind me than ahead of me. This house, this ranch, it has a long history. A lot of it is sad. I'm quiet, and I'm set in my ways. I am not an easy man." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "You are young. You have your whole life waiting for you. A life that could be easier than this one. Brighter. You're smart, and you're capable, and you're good. You deserve a young man, a house without ghosts, a future that isn't tied to someone's past." He finally turned to look at her. Her expression was calm, her eyes searching his. "You'll find someone better down the road," he said, the words costing him more than he could have imagined. "Someone more fitting. It's the sensible thing. I know that." She held his gaze for a long time. The entire valley seemed to be holding its breath. The sun was fully up now, and in its light he could see the faint lines of tiredness around her eyes, but also the unshakable strength that was the core of her. She took a small step closer to him. "The road ends here," she whispered. The words were not triumphant. They were not a grand declaration. They were a simple statement of fact, as solid and real as the ground beneath their feet. It was the truest thing he had ever heard. He felt a lifetime of carefully constructed walls crumble into dust. He felt the heavy stone of grief he had carried for 8 years dissolve and wash away. He reached out and took her hand, her fingers curled around his, warm and strong. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice thick. "Elias," she said, and the way she said his name was a vow. "I've been certain for a while now." A week later, they rode into town together. They didn't go to Mr. Miller's store. They went straight to the small house where Preacher Evans lived. They stood before him in his tidy parlor, Elias in his clean Sunday shirt, and Sarah in her best dress, the one she'd kept wrapped in paper in her small bundle. Gus waited for them on the preacher's porch. The ceremony was short. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. When they walked out into the afternoon sun, man and wife, the world looked different, brighter, sharper. They stopped at the store on the way out of town. Miller was behind the counter, pretending to be busy. He looked up as they entered. He took in Elias's hand, resting on the small of Sarah's back. He saw the new, simple gold band on her finger. He didn't smile his gossipy smile. He just nodded once, a slow and deeply satisfied nod. He looked at Elias, and his eyes were full of an old friend's approval. "About time, Elias," he said gruffly. "About damn time." Elias just squeezed Sarah's hand and led her from the store, back to the wagon, back to the long road that led home. 2 years passed. The ranch thrived. The fences were all mended. The house was no longer too large. It was full, full of the smell of baking bread, the sound of quiet conversation, the warmth of a fire in the hearth on a cold night. The upstairs rooms were no longer dusty and silent. One of them had been turned into a nursery, painted a soft, hopeful yellow. Juniper, the skittish mare, was gentle as a lamb now. She would follow Sarah around the yard like a shadow. New life was everywhere, in the fields, in the barn, and growing steadily inside Sarah herself. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch, just as they had that one morning. Sarah's belly was round beneath her dress, and Elias's hand rested on it, feeling the flutter of the new life within. Gus was asleep at their feet, his muzzle now almost entirely white. They watched the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The silence between them was a comfortable blanket. "I'm glad you stayed," Elias said, his voice soft in the twilight. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. "There was nowhere else to go," she said. He understood what she meant. It was not a statement of desperation. It was a statement of belonging. Home was not a place on a map. It was a person. It was a feeling. It was knowing with absolute certainty that your road had ended exactly where it was supposed to. He looked out at the valley, his home, and felt a sense of peace so profound it was like a prayer being answered. The arithmetic had finally added up. There is a story we tell ourselves about time. We measure it in years, in seasons, in the graying of hair, in the deepening of lines around the eyes. We use the arithmetic of age to decide what is possible, what is sensible, what is allowed. We convince ourselves that a life is a straight line, and that once we pass a certain point on that line, the opportunities for joy, for love, for a new beginning are behind us. Elias Thorne was a man who believed in that story. He lived by the cold, hard numbers of his loss. He built a fortress of routine and solitude around his heart, believing he was protecting the memory of what he had lost, when in truth, he was only starving what was left of himself. He looked at his 51 years and saw an ending. He saw a man who had no right to hope for more. But love does not speak the language of arithmetic. It does not care about the difference in years. It speaks the language of value. It measures a person not by their age, but by their character. It sees worth in a quiet competence, in a steady gaze, in the simple, profound kindness of making a second cup of coffee without being asked. Sarah Jenkins arrived not as a disruption, but as a revelation. She did not try to tear down the walls around his heart. She simply showed him, through her own quiet strength and unadorned honesty, that the door was never locked. He had only to turn the knob. Her declaration that the road ends here was not about settling. It was an act of profound vision. She saw the man he was beneath the grief, the goodness beneath the solitude. She saw a home where he saw only a house of ghosts. His journey was not one of forgetting his past, but of learning to live with it without being buried by it. He had to learn to count differently. He had to understand that the value of a person's presence in your life is not a number you can write down in a ledger. It is the warmth of a meal you did not have to cook for yourself. It is the peace of a shared silence. It is the courage to believe that your heart, no matter how broken, is still capable of holding love again. This is the quiet courage that changes the world, not with a bang, but with a whisper. It is the courage to look at the numbers, at the sensible, practical facts, and to choose the intangible, immeasurable truth of the human heart instead. It is the choice to believe that the road does not have to stretch on forever into loneliness, but that it can, if you are brave enough, lead you home. Thank you for your time and your attention. It is a gift, and it is everything to us here. Knowing that these stories find a home with you is the fuel that keeps this channel going. We are deeply grateful for every moment you choose to spend with us. May you find kindness on your road, and may you recognize home when you arrive there. Until next time.